Hi, everyone. Welcome to this AI Monetization Podcast. I'm Binny, the co-founder of Project Pro. On this podcast, we speak with industry practitioners and leaders on what kind of ROI and business outcomes they are seeing with AI. Today, we have somebody ideally suited to help us understand this. We have John Sukup. John is a managing director and founder of Expected X, where he has been focusing, a lot of the last decade on AI solution design, consulting, and training for large enterprises, including the likes of Cisco, Levi Strauss, and Ipsos. John is also the author and the podcast co-host of the Unriveted Media podcast that he runs. And previously, John was the lead AI ML release engineer at Levi Strauss. John, thank you for taking time to do this. Welcome to the show.
Absolutely glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. John, one of the things we're curious about is you have many of these customer conversations. We are listening to their problems and trying to solve them with AI. What would you say are the top burning challenges or problems with AI, or in the current state of the world we live in? You comes up a lot in your calls.
Right. Well, I think a lot of it, there's a couple of different perspectives that you can take on that. First of all, there's a lot of organizations that just want to implement something with AI just to simply say they're using AI, or so they can create a website that's got, a dot AI instead of a dot com after it.
Yeah.
So I think, and probably what we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth as we go forward is how do I measure the impact of implementing a system like that. So these are some of the bigger challenges that companies don't know how to create that measurement. And it's not entirely surprising because even when businesses were focused on machine learning solutions, which again, is a subfield within what we think of as AI, they were also having trouble connecting the dots and determining the implication or the ROI on spending for building out those systems. So I think it's the same problem: is how do we take AI and determine whether or not it's improving our company. I think one of the big challenges right now too, or wrenches, I guess, of moving forward for some organizations, and I tend to agree, is when we talk about AI today, for most people, we think of it as synonymous with large language models, right? Which, just like any other thing in the AI or machine learning space, is non-deterministic, right? We can set parameters within our models to make them reproducible. But again, if we use an LLM, for example, to generate some textual outcome, most likely every time we do that, unless we put proper guardrails in place, we'll generate something different every time. So organizations are a little hesitant about that, and I don't say that I disagree with them, especially when these systems are known to hallucinate sometimes as well.
Yeah. And these points you made about these non-deterministic outcomes, right? Um, how do you nudge a conversation forward when you don't know until after the fact what's going to happen or not, right? The system has to go live, it has to get fine-tuned on local data, then you figure out how well is it working for a specific use case. Is that way of operation very different from what companies are used to? Because in a traditional IT project, you want to migrate to the cloud, it's done or not. But with an AI system, it's still fuzzy. Is that different, do you think, or is it very similar? How do you nudge a conversation forward in a probabilistic scenario like that?
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely have to create realistic expectations on what these LLM-based applications are capable of doing.
Yeah.
You have to, and this is, again, it's the same conversation you have with machine learning, is that nothing stays static over time. Data is always evolving. It doesn't matter if that data is numerical data. It doesn't matter if that data is natural language over time. I mean, they add new words to the dictionary every year. So, if you think about it from that perspective, is that these things do evolve over time. So it's not a once-off, one and done type of situation. It is, we create a proof of concept usually, evolve that proof of concept into something that is more feature, you know, fuller, more full of features that are based on our users' requirements, and then push that to production. But again, it's a never-ending cycle, right? I mean, this is why we have CI/CD processes, or CT for continuous training, which is inherent in ML ops or LLM ops too. So I think, as long as it's understood that it's not so much about, is this project, never going to end? Yeah. It's how can we at least show an incremental benefit at the earliest stages, and then continue to show how that benefit can either stay stable, yeah, or improve over time. Yeah. The last thing you want is to revert back to previous processes, which could be an indicator that maybe you didn't need to implement that system in the first place.
Yeah. No, that's a great point you made about those quick wins you want to demonstrate early in the process, right? And kind of leads me to the next question, which is, are there some common characteristics in use cases that usually result in quick wins that you have noticed? Is that a specific vertical or a horizontal where these quick wins are a little more easily achievable from your experience?
Yeah, well, the typical applications that I've seen are usually external facing, so customer facing applications, which I think can be a bit dangerous for organizations to implement. Yeah. Almost every organization that wants to do something with an LLM-based system, mm-hmm, their first thing they want to do is build a chatbot that connects to their knowledge base, basically a RAG system in its simplest form, right? My opinion is to build these systems as a internal way of operationalizing workflows or automating workflows for individuals within an organization, so that the outcomes don't necessarily impact customers, right? Mm-hmm. So some of the quick wins, that we want to achieve, mm-hmm, are, how can we measure the improvement on productivity? How can we say, if we're using like a issue tracking system like Jira, for example, or something, mm-hmm, how can we use these systems to reduce the amount of time it takes to do something that, yeah, we've been trying to do, some particular workflow? So sometimes it's not necessarily initially a monetary conversation, yeah, unless you already have a monetary label for, this step takes this amount of hours and that costs us this amount of money. Yeah. You can obviously do that. Not a lot of companies do that. So sometimes it's like the quick wins are not necessarily in cost savings or extra earnings, mm-hmm, but in reduction of time spent on particularly monotonous tasks. And that could be, either things that employees just don't like to do over and over and over because they're repetitive, or tasks that have very little, value add to the organization.
Makes sense. So customer-facing tasks, mm-hmm, that not necessarily have to show a revenue upside or a cost saving, but almost like a time reduction, productivity saving filter such as that.
Right. It gets the conversation going. My perspective, I mean, the entire name of my organization, Expected X, yeah, is a reference to expected value, which is something that not a lot of consultancies, I think, typically focus on is, how can we measure the impact of this? And that measurement isn't necessarily monetary always. Sometimes it's measured in time savings or productivity as well.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And you referred to this earlier, which is a lot of use cases being driven by because we have to do something in AI, right? Like, Are a lot of your use cases, are they FOMO driven, ROI driven, some combination of both? What do you see in the market right now?
Yeah, I think right now a lot of it is just driven by a keeping up with the Joneses type of mentality
Yeah.
around a lot of organizations. So organizations that I've worked with in a consultant capacity through my company, and even organizations that I've worked with um, as a full-time employee.
Yeah.
It seems that it's very much a cart before the horse situation sometimes, where it's not necessarily ROI, it's not necessarily productivity enhancements. It's very much I'm going to invest $100 million in this, and then I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do with it.
Yeah.
Now that story, I believe, is changing.
I see.
I think it's taken the last couple of years, and even some of the large like foundational model organizations like OpenAI, Anthropic, Cohere, Microsoft, Google. I mean, everyone who has skin in the game of the foundational model. When their engineers are starting to say, we're starting to approach kind of the limits of what we can do with these models right now. Mm-hmm. The story, I think, is trickling down into businesses where they're thinking more of what you said earlier, like now we need to start thinking about, okay, we have the tools. They're probably not going to get that much better from our current approach. What are we going to do to gain that ROI? Mm-hmm. So the question now, I think, is turning from let's spend a bunch of money, implement something that we can say is AI and tell our investors and pat ourselves in the back, to saying, okay, now we really need to have a discussion about how do we measure the impact of doing this. And we're not going to throw $100 million at this. We're going to throw maybe $100,000 at this, maybe even less than that. And that's kind of how I've found my footing with my organization too, is through let's not take a big bite out of the AI pie. Mm-hmm. And focus on something small, something that makes sense, mm-hmm. something that shows ROI. And I think that that's where companies are moving forward in right now is show me the impact before I go and throw half of my next year's budget into the development.
Yeah. And as companies go into the nitty-gritty of actually implementing, right, and we've all been hearing about agents, I would love to understand your personal definition of what an agent is. And just for the benefit of the audience, we are all aware of interacting with an LLM either through a chat interface. We are aware of interacting with an LLM through an API call. At what point does an API call become an agent? Like, is there a clear black and white line, or is it a sliding scale? Would love to get your thoughts.
Well, I think, I mean, I don't know if there's a well-defined definition for that. And my definition is probably the same as, how can we take an LLM and allow it to perform some autonomous functions on its own without having to rely on constant back and forth between the end user and the LLM. The LLM is able to, like you said, make calls to APIs. And then when it receives that, response back from the API, rather than query the user, what do I do next, to be able to take a series of steps. So there's usually a planning layer involved in agentic AI systems or workflows, where a user's query is first, broken down into a series of tasks. And then those tasks are executed in, sequential or parallel fashion, depending on what the ask is. So, I think the agents, in terms of giving them the tools in order to perform these types of tasks, I think that's kind of where things are going towards now, is how can we reduce human interaction enough so that agents can perform on a human's behalf. But at the same time, and I feel like this is probably a follow-up question that you're going to ask, is there a level where too much autonomy is a problem? And I believe that we are still in a stage where agentic AI is where we're headed towards. Where this is where we're trying to push the boundary. But if LLMs are the way that they currently are right now is any indication of, do we still need humans in the loop? My answer would be absolutely.
Okay, that's relieving. Um,
We're not going to lose our jobs to AI, agentic AI systems.
Not yet.
At least not yet. Maybe in 10 to 15 years. Maybe not that, but in 2025, probably not.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. What do enterprises need to get ready with before they embark on one of these agentic workflows to be implemented inside themselves?
I think a lot of it is non-technical. I think that most people look at the implementation of anything technical, be it something in IT, something in AI, something in ML, what have you, as the biggest chunk of the undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what would behoove organizations to do would be to make sure that they are spending enough time and resources and efforts on answering the questions of their employees and helping them understand, how are things going to change in your role? How are things going to improve? How are things going to be different? What things might you not have to worry about anymore? Alleviating people from thinking that AI is, going to take their jobs. We just got done saying that that's definitely a top of mind topic. But depending on who you talk to, some people will say it's happening all around us.
Mm-hmm.
And surely for some low-level jobs that don't require a lot of skill or are more, task-oriented, that will be the case. But for more, roles that require a higher level of cognition or creativity, I think we're still pretty safe. So I think organizations, while there is definitely a technical element, obviously a technical element that comes into preparing for an undertaking of developing an AI system, my recommendation is spending time on the human aspect and helping people learn how to use these systems for their benefit, rather than think that someday, the system's going to do everything that they do and that they'll become redundant and, removed from the workforce. We're definitely not there again for some of the jobs that I mentioned previously. Higher, cognitive level and creative jobs are not going to be impacted immediately.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And with the developers who are implementing AI, right? And since you have some experience in training as well, what do you think is going to happen to the role of a developer? Meaning, will regular full stack developers be expected to become full stack AI developers as well? Because there's going to be some component of AI in everything. Or do you think the AI work will still go to the data science team, AI team? How do you think this will kind of play out?
Well, I mean, the way I think of it is the same way I've always thought about, like ML engineers or data scientists in the grand scheme of things, is that we're all working, in essence, we're all working together on the same piece of the puzzle within the organization, right? So we all have our specialized tasks that we work on that we're better attuned to. For example, my background is very much on back-end development. If you put JavaScript or something or React in front of me and ask me to piece that together, I'm not going to be anywhere near what someone who has front-end experience for several years or maybe even a couple of years is able to do. So I think what's going to happen, and it's already happening, and I have the hands-on experience to say it so myself, is the developers are not necessarily going to be focusing on working necessarily with teams that are AI experts or data scientists. I think what you're going to see and what you are seeing is that the developers are going to be utilizers of AI. So we see all these platforms that are coming out now with code generation, code engineering. There's platforms, Cursor, Windsurfer, I think. there's a few out there right now, and there's even good old VS Code with Copilot involved in there too, which all essentially are tasked with the same thing. How can I write a code base based off of a prompt? So I think everyone that interacts with these AI tools are going to become, in essence, prompt engineers in order to do their jobs. Now, hopefully, they're not relying completely on these tools to do everything for them and just hit a button and make a commit to their GitHub repo and call it a day and go to the park for the rest of the day. So I think software developers are going to be utilizers of these tools, and I think that if these tools are if these are specialized tools within an organization, then that maybe their data scientists or AI ML teams have helped provide. Then there might be a conversation necessarily on that. So I think that they're still going to have some element of understanding of how AI works.
Yeah.
But again, it depends, I think, what kind of developer. So if someone building like a user interface or worried about UX, it's going to be a little bit different than if they're actually down there, saying, how do I connect the front end to the back end if the back end is inherently based on AI or AI agents or whatever.
That's a very nice analogy that you brought in, which is the front end back end set, right? Which is sure, many back end developers are full stack, they could do some front end, but then the dedicated front end developers are always better at front end than the back end engineer could do that, and something like that would play out with ML as well. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah. And John, so when a company decides to go down one of these use cases, right? How do they? So let's take, for example, something like a cross-sell or an upsell use case inside retail or financial industry or something like that. Now, to solve that use case, there's probably like three different ways they can do it. There's probably some kind of a auto ML or a low code, no code platform out there where you can drag some data and get. That's one way to do it. The second way to do it is there's probably a dedicated SaaS tool, an entire company built around just upsell, cross-sell. And the third way is to custom build that solution either internally or through an outside agency. How does a company pick which of these options to go with based on a use case?
Well, I honestly think it's just based on their level of comfort, their own evolution of AI. Where are they on their journey? It's the build versus buy question, which is not really specific to the AI ML space. We've been doing this for years with software. So I don't know if it's even relevant to say that it's specific for this particular field. I think you're going to run into a lot of companies nowadays that are SaaS offerings or agency offerings that are going to have very little experience building out anything with AI or ML, because they're just trying to take a piece of the pie because it's such a big industry right now. And they'll probably all end up in the same place, within a few years. So I think for organizations that have no level of comfort whatsoever, it's something that, maybe they build a product, and all they know is how to build that product. They're obviously going to want to have a higher level of service involved in developing out those systems. Yeah. Now, if it's a company that's inherently a tech organization, then they're probably going to have individuals in there that are a little bit more comfortable with some of the development work and, want to save some money rather than try and put everything into an outside organization. From my own particular standpoint as an agency that does build these types of solutions, my goal is always working with an organization that we can work together for a given amount of time, maybe 2 to 6 months, maybe 2 to 5 years, hopefully not that long, but then to ultimately be able to pass that workload and pass those systems off to that organization, train those individuals in how to use and how to maintain those systems. And sometimes that's just as simple as keeping proper documentation, which pretty much every engineer out there doesn't like doing. And I always get after them, like, you got to write stuff down. But I think it's definitely based on, again, the human element of where an organization is and who do they have within that organization that has the experience or the background to gauge what level of service they need from someone who's, we can provide a few add-on services to what you already have, or we can do a full level cloud implementation of an entire platform that you can use to build, for example, an agentic AI sandbox system with using, maybe another software as a service tool. So again, it depends, which is the favorite answer of many people in the science and technology world. It depends.
And are there some of your favorite use cases that you've seen in action that you are like, okay, this is a very nice implementation of AI? Are there one or two that you could share some details on?
Yeah. So one use case is building a fully autonomous department, which some people have tried to extend out to building a fully autonomous organization based off of AI agents. So essentially, how do I take the persona of an individual within an existing type of organization and take their entire day to day and turn that into an automated series of agentic actions that can be handled by a series of workflows. And you do see some organizations now that are putting this together for individuals. Trying to extend it again to an entire organization or enterprise level is a different story, and it won't work at all right now. Again, so we're safe in that. Another application, though, is maybe not necessarily an application of AI, but a way of making AI more available to the masses. So again, with agentic AI as an example, there's a lot of organizations out there right now that are taking the the very code-heavy elements of building an agentic AI system and turning that into low-code, no-code, basically sandbox environments. Mm-hmm. So instead of creating a specific tool for an organization, you give the organization a series of particular agents and tasks and integrations, and allow them to essentially create like a drag and drop environment, on their computer screen to automate some particular workflow, which means they can make basically whatever they want, as long as it's within the confines of the different, agents or tasks that are involved. So it's not building something specific. It's actually giving the end user the ability to generate an agentic AI workflow without having to know the code or any of the lower level details. It's abstracted away. I think, thinking from a future perspective, what we're seeing is organizations, I believe it's Anthropic with Claude, who recently created a ability for their LLMs to interact with the interface level on a computer. So move my mouse around and open this window and then do this and do this. And I don't think the functionality is exactly there yet. I don't have any personal experience using it, so I don't want to say anything that's not true. But from what I've read and seen, across the internet, it sounds like a good idea right now, but it's not where people would expect it to be. So thinking about that in the future, I think that might be something that becomes more prominent, especially in the automation of tasks. And maybe something like that will become like another agent within like the drag and drop interface that I just described. Right. So, if anything tells me what's going to happen in the next few years of AI, or if anyone knows what's going to happen, good luck. But it seems like things are moving very, very rapidly in a very quick clip. So keep your eyes open.
Yeah, an entire org or a department with agentic workflows just sounds super powerful. And I remember I was just listening to this interview with Sam Altman at OpenAI some time back, and spoke about how probably the first billion-dollar companies with a single founder and nobody else is probably in the process of getting built right now. So what do you say, Mick? Yeah, makes a lot of
Absolutely. Yeah. You know what? And if I can be that founder, that,
yeah.
that would be great. So yeah, I think maybe if we get the pieces together and then maybe wait for some additional improvements in some of the underlying models or functionality,
Yeah.
we're there. I think one of the bigger questions right now for AI, and I don't want to go off on a tangent too much, is how do we manage the energy consumption element of AI? Because these data centers are extract a lot of power. Training models takes a lot of energy. I know that there's statistics out there that say, how much it costs to train, GPT o1 or Gemini on Google, and it's extraordinary amounts. So, if anything, I think, there's the question, how do we put AI forward? And there's also, how do we reduce the amount of resources AI systems cost? And when you find that, that balance between the two, that's where the sweet spot is. So, but yes, I want to be a part of that one-person billion-dollar organization. So
That's good to you.
hopefully I look back on this in the future and say, yeah, that was the moment that I made the decision to do that.
I'm sure. Very, very soon, John. Good luck with that.
I hope. Thank you.
And to your earlier problem about energy, right? I mean, it's pretty incredible the scope of the ambition of this thing, which is the limiting factor seems to be you can't make enough of these things for the demand on the other side, and you have technology companies going around buying nuclear plants. So just the scope of ambition of what's going on is just incredible. Just that gives a lot of confidence on what can actually happen forward.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, I know nuclear power had its heyday at one point and now it's kind of gone away, but, maybe AI will bring back
Yeah.
the use case of nuclear power, which is inherently a clean power technology, but, because of accidents that have happened over the years, I think it's kind of turned the public off to it, and it's not as ubiquitous as it used to be, or as it was going to become, I should say. And maybe this will change people's minds for that. So we'll see.
Yeah. And the other thing I was curious about, John, is given that you have a lot of experience and passion for teaching and training as well, right? So when I think of Gen AI use cases, and Gen AI fundamentally being good at digesting a ton of content, generating different formats of content in a very personalized, customized way, that just seems like a use case quietly great for education, training, upskilling, personalized roadmaps. But we don't hear of too many use cases out there with AI and skilling and learning. Am I missing something, or is there a reason why you think we're not hearing too many powerful use cases there?
Well, in terms of training, I mean, I think that training is definitely becoming more of a hot topic for organizations in AI, which obviously is good for me because that's something that I'm focused on myself. But I think, too, one of the holdups for AI training and why you might not hear a lot about, some of the more in-depth elements is a couple of things. I think it's because the field is evolving so quickly that organizations are not necessarily sure if they want to invest in teaching something that might become obsolete next week. That's one thing. Again, that's speculative. I'm not sure if that's exactly right. Another thing, too, is that training is becoming more democratized because of the internet. Right? So organizations not necessarily need to focus on this because they think, well, you know what, if I can just find a couple of videos on YouTube, maybe I can point my employees in that direction and they'll get trained up on LangChain or something like that. If they're trying to go like an agentic system. So I think that, there's some topics right now in AI that are evergreen, at least as long as we continue to call LLMs AI. Prompt engineering, I think, is definitely one that is going to become, or is not going to become, but is extremely important. And not just when we think about prompts, when you go to ChatGPT and type in a prompt and get a response. But when it comes to building agentic AI systems, where a lot of the times the prompts themselves, are fitted with context placeholders that are designed for external user input. So how do I create a prompt that is going to achieve the goals of my product while also allowing for the flexibility of a user's input? So knowing where those points are to allow for a user's input are definitely important in the agentic AI space. I don't think there's going to be a lot of training in like how the transformer models work, the underpinning, neural network architecture for LLMs, because even for me, and I'm not a mathematician by any stretch of the imagination, you know, it's like, do people actually want to or feel like they need to know the underpinnings of how these models work? So I think you're going to see maybe less in the technical side of training and more in the application side of getting people to think how to utilize these tools. So again, it's kind of back to what I was saying earlier about the technical side versus the human side, and how organizations don't focus on the soft skills. I think we are going to see is a lot of people trying to say, how do I take, and I'm sure there's a technical term for it that escapes me at the moment. How do I take a process and break it down into a given series of steps?
Yeah.
And then how within those steps do I quantify different elements of how to complete those steps?
Yeah.
So that inherently isn't necessarily technical. It's just, how do I take a workflow that I use maybe some tools for right now and create it in a standard operating procedure? And then from there, it's then how do I take that framework and then apply it to an agentic AI workflow or system? Even an ML pipeline could be the same way. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot more people out there that are AI users rather than AI developers, which means I think the training elements are probably, or at least should be, more focused on building out that skill. How do I take what I do and break it down into something that can be turned into something that AI does, if that makes any sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, there's all this human knowledge sitting inside us, and the AI needs something to kind of fine tune itself on. And you're suggesting almost like a layer of playbooks, details.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's the knowledge base, and I won't belabor the conversation on this any further, but the one of the biggest hindrances in developing AI systems for organizations, especially large organizations, is data quality. Same thing can be said for ML. It's always something that what they want to skip over and get straight to the good, the juicy stuff, like building and training the models and putting them out. But when you look at the data that they're built off of, they're almost always in disarray and disorder, and very little time is taken to clean those up. Or even if they don't exist, sometimes the documentation isn't there at all. So I think maybe that's another element for training, is how do I elucidate this process in a way that is understandable. Explain it like I'm five, which is a common concept on the internet, and write that out in easy to digest steps. And then maybe it is as simple as passing an LLM over that input and generating a system or a plan for a workflow using that. But again, it all starts with the data, and if the data is not clean, or if it's spread throughout, you're going to have significant problems.
Makes sense. And to wrap up, John, there's so much happening in this space. How do you stay in touch? What are your go-to resources?
So I am almost always on LinkedIn. I'm a very avid LinkedIn user. I think we connected on LinkedIn, so that's pretty common. There's a lot of online newsletters that I use. So these newsletters are Mark Tech Post is a good one. There's AI News every weekend, I think. I'm trying to think of what the name is. AI Research Insights is another one. So I use a lot of newsletters and try to join a lot of online kind of like user groups. And there's also groups in town here where I'm at for Google developers, AI ML practitioners. So there's a lot of different resources out there, but you know, it depends how you like to digest your information.
Mhm. Right, that's very helpful, that roundup. This has been incredibly helpful. Thank you so much for taking time to do this.
All right. Thanks, Binny.